I platinumed the game, Final Fantasy III, and here's how it went. In this game you play as John Fantasy III, who, along with his crew of Onion Knights, accidentally fall into a cave. They manage to survive the landing and search for a way out, which brings them into the altar of the Wind Crystal. Before they can investigate further, they're attacked by a creature named the Land Turtle. After they fight it off, the crystal speaks to them. It informs our heroes that due to a massive earthquake burying the Wind Crystal, the balance between light and dark has been disrupted. To fight against this, the Wind Crystal entrusts us with the last of its power, so that we can go on a quest to gather the power of the other 3 elemental crystals to restore the balance by stopping the encroaching darkness. Accepting the blessing of the Wind Crystal earns us the trophy, Hope of the Wind. Its power grants our party the ability to switch to jobs other than Onion Knight. We get these 5 in particular: Warrior, Monk, White Mage, Black Mage, and Red Mage. As we set out on our heroic quest, one of the first things we learn is that the emergence of darkness after the earthquake has had wide-reaching effects all throughout the world. The first we encounter is in the nearby castle of Sasune and the mining town of Kazas, both of which have been cursed by a Djinn, turning their inhabitants into ghosts. Unfortunately, we can't ignore their plight, since the only path out of the region is blocked by a boulder. While asking around, we meet an airship engineer named Sid, who's apparently in the same boat we are, so he lets us borrow his airship, which we then use to fly over to the Djinn's lair. While heading inside, I earned 2 trophies. The first is Job Trainee, which we earn for getting a job to level 10. The second is Apprentice Warrior, which we earn for defeating 100 enemies. As we progress further into the cave, we meet the Princess of Sasune, Sarah, who's here to seal the Djinn to rescue her kingdom. Due to our shared goals, she tags along with our party. At the end of the cave, we encounter the Djinn. Due to his powers being enhanced by the darkness, we have to beat him within an inch of his life before Sarah can seal him. With the curse lifted, Sarah leaves our party. To thank us for everything we've done, the king rewards us with a canoe. We then sneak around the castle, stealing everything we can get our hands on. This earns us the trophy, Rookie Treasure Hunter. We then head back over to the town of Kazas, where we meet up with Sid, who joins our party so that we can work together to figure out how to break the boulder. We go to talk with a local smith who fits Sid's airship with a prow that we can use as a battering ram. Doing so destroys Sid's airship, while also earning us the trophy, Crushing Force. We then go with Sid back to his home city of Canaan, where he immediately leaves our party. After this, we travel over to a nearby mountain named Dragon's Peak. As we ascend it, we earn 2 more trophies. The first is Thrifty Spender for earning a total of 10,000 gil, and the second is Field Research Basic for filling out 10% of the bestiary. When we reach the top of the mountain, we're grabbed by a dragon who drops us into its nest as food for its children. While up there, we meet an amnesiac named Dash. Before we can talk further, we're attacked by the dragon Bahamut. It's far too powerful, so we have no choice but to flee with Dash. Upon joining our party, he gives us the spell Mini. With it, we're able to shrink ourselves down so that we can pass through the gnome village of Tozus, which then leads us to the Vikings' Cove. We learn that they're trapped on the shore due to a sea serpent named the Nepto Dragon, who's been destroying any ships that try to pass through the local waters. The leader of the Vikings agrees to let us have their ship, in exchange for us dealing with the dragon. At first I tried to fight it directly, but that went quite poorly. So instead I traveled to the nearby Nepto temple to try and figure out how to appease it. Inside we find a statue of the dragon with a hole where its eye should be. Shrinking down and going inside allows us to track down the giant rat who stole the crystal that was responsible for keeping the Nepto dragon under control. Once we kill the rat, we're able to slot the crystal back into place. This calms the dragon down, allowing us to sail out of the bay unharmed. The spirit of the Nepto dragon also gives us the Fang of Water, which will be important later. In the midst of my seafaring, I grabbed the trophy Experienced Warrior for defeating 300 enemies. As we explore around with our ship, we learn quite a lot of new lore, so here are the 2 most important bits. The first is that this is the second time that the balance between light and dark has been threatened. Previously, the light nearly overwhelmed the dark, and so 4 heroes had to come from the world of darkness to put a stop to it. The second important bit of lore is that the continent that we're on is actually floating in the sky. The landmass's buoyancy is maintained by an engine in a location called the Tower of Owen. As we speak, the forces of darkness are trying to sabotage it to kill us all, so heading to the tower becomes our next objective. To enter it, we have to grab a spell called Toad, which turns us into frogs, allowing us to swim through the tower's entrance. As we hop our way up its many floors, Desh begins to remember pieces of his past. And then at the top of the tower, we encounter a creature named Medusa. We quickly kill her, but not before she can fatally damage the engine. It is at this moment that Desh fully remembers who he is. He is apparently a person from the past who was cryogenically frozen so that he could awaken if the engine ever needed to be repaired or protected. He realizes that the only way to fix the damage is to climb inside, and so he hops in despite the growing flames. Witnessing his sacrifice earns us the trophy, A Watchman's Duty. Before his death, he informs us that the Crystal of Fire can be found on the Island of Dwarves, and so we make that our next objective. Unfortunately, the entrance to the altar is on fire, so we have no choice but to get roped into the dwarves' problems instead. Their civilization has two important relics, a pair of ice horns that can be used together to allow someone to bypass the flames of the altar. Before we got here, one of them was stolen by a thief named Gutsco, and so we have to dive into the subterranean lake to pursue him. For the crime of theft, we beat him to death, and then we return the horn to the dwarves. As we hand it over, Gutsco jumps out of our shadow since that's apparently something he can do. He then steals both horns and goes to use them to reach the Crystal of Fire. We follow behind him and then confront him in the altar room. By stealing the power of the crystal, he is transformed into a creature called the Salamander. Initially, I jumped into the fight without preparing, so I ended up needing to leave to heal before coming back for another attempt. On the way back in, I grabbed the trophy Legendary Warrior for defeating 500 enemies. I then return to the Salamander and successfully kill him. This allows us to receive the power of the Fire Crystal, which gets us the trophy Hope of Fire. The Blessing of the Fire Crystal gives us access to 4 new jobs. All 4 of them have unique abilities, so let's quickly go over them. The first is called Ranger. They have an ability called Barrage, which shoots 4 arrows at random enemies. Next we have the Knight. They have an enhanced version of the Defend command called Guard, along with the passive ability to take physical attacks for other party members when their HP is in the red. The third job, Thief, has the ability to steal items from enemies. They also have an ability called Scram, which is like an improved version of the Flee command. The last of the 4 jobs is called Scholar. They have an ability called Study, which lets them analyze enemies to determine their HP and weaknesses. Their second ability, Alchemy, lets them use and enhance certain items like potions. Immediately after acquiring these jobs, we learn that the town of Tokul is being razed as we speak, and so we head down there to try and save them. Upon arriving, we get captured and taken to Castle Hein, which is actually a giant sentient tree named the Elder Tree, which has been cursed into being a floating castle by the warlock Hein. His soldiers lock us up alongside a bunch of people from the nearby kingdom of Argus, along with their king. We're able to use Mini to shrink ourselves down to sneak out of the cell. This lets us go to confront Hein. As a boss, he's actually quite interesting. Every few turns, he changes his elemental weakness, which makes it so that any magical attacks that use it will be extra effective, while any that don't will heal him. This makes the Scholar job extremely helpful since they can determine the weakness and then use their alchemy ability to throw enhanced magical items at Hein. With his death, everyone, including the tree, is freed, and the King of Argus is able to return to power. Before bidding us farewell, the Elder Tree gives us the Fang of Wind. We then go over to Castle Argus where we are rewarded with a device called the Wheel of Time, which we can then bring over to Sid, who uses it to convert our boat into an airship. From here, I got lost for a little while. I normally wouldn't mention this if not for the fact that while I was wandering around, I got the trophy Senior Worker for getting a job to level 50. Eventually, I realized that the airship gives us the ability to leave the flying continent, so I did that. As we explore around the surface world, we learn that the water crystal was also buried during the earthquake from the start of the game. In its absence, the people of the surface were cursed and turned to stone, with the world then being submerged beneath the ocean. Luckily, one of the few survivors is the priestess of the water temple, Arya. We team up with her to try and fix things. Long story short, we grab a fragment of the water crystal that still has some light left in it, which we then bring to the water crystal so that we can undo the curse. After we return the shard, Arya takes an arrow that was meant for us. It was shot by a creature named the Kraken. They were sent here to guard the crystal by their master, Zand, to make sure that nobody could restore its power. We make short work of him and then we receive the blessing of the water crystal from Arya before her death. Shortly after this, the Crystal of Water begins undoing the curse, which causes a massive earthquake as these submerged continents rise back above the ocean. As this happens, I receive the trophy Smart Saver, since beating the Kraken put me over the requisite money threshold to have earned a total of 100,000 gil. At some point during the earthquake, our party loses consciousness and we wake up 3 days later. When we get out of bed, we receive the trophy Hope of Water for receiving the power of the water crystal. Receiving the blessing of the water crystal gives us access to 7 new jobs, so let's quickly go over them. The first is called Dragoon. It has the unique ability Jump, which lets you jump into the air for a full turn and then land on the enemy you targeted. It does a significant amount of damage while also allowing you to avoid all the attacks that happen while you're in the air. The next job is called Viking. They have the ability Draw Attacks, which lets them provoke enemies into targeting them instead of the other party members. Next we have Black Belts, who have two abilities. The first is called Kick, which allows you to jump at and kick all of the enemies at once. Their second ability is called Boost, which lets you charge up to do extra damage on your next attack. If you do it 3 times in a row though, you'll explode. We then have the Dark Knight, who has one ability, Blade Blitz, which lets them cut all of the enemies at once. Next up we have Bards, who are able to use 4 different songs. Paean, which heals the party, Minuet, which raises the party's attack, Elegy, which decreases the damage taken by the party, and Requiem, which causes a random status effect to all enemies. Using them doesn't cost MP, so I found them extremely useful throughout the entire game. Next up we have the Evoker. They have the ability to summon various gods in battle. Typically they'll either do an attack or an effect that changes depending on the summon. These effects can range from either healing to buffing the party or applying status effects to the enemies. Lastly, we have my favorite job, Geomancer. Their only ability is called Terrain, and it allows them to perform different magical attacks based on the environment that the fight is taking place in. The exact spell that is cast and the enemy that is targeted is always completely random. Getting back on track, we learned that while we were out, the local Lord Goldur had our airship chained down. He's apparently afraid that we're the prophesized heroes who are here to take the Earth Crystal from him. And yeah, he's completely correct, so we have no choice but to kill him. To reach his mansion, we must first cross the Bottomless Bog. We accomplish this by delving into the local sewer to find an elderly woman who can give us some magic shoes. And so we enter Goldur's house, steal all of his valuables, and then beat him to death. Unfortunately, before succumbing to his injuries, he destroys the Earth Crystal, and so our quest is officially doomed. On the bright side, we're able to get the key to free our airship, which then allows us to fly away to try and figure out what to do next. We end up flying over the city of Saronia, where we're immediately shot out of the sky. After crashing, we learn that their king has recently gone insane. Currently, he's ordering both halves of his army to fight to the death. He's also barred exit to the city, so we have no choice but to get involved. Eventually, we find Saronia's prince, Alice, who was exiled by the king, and we use him as our ticket to get inside the castle. When we get inside, the king, who we learn is being controlled by one of his advisors, attempts to stab the prince. At the last moment, he resists and stabs himself instead. We then confront the advisor, Minister Gigametz, who turns out to actually be a creature named Garuda. We make short work of him, and then Alice honors his father's last wishes by becoming the new king of Saronia. While he's busy doing that, we plunder the castle, which earns us the trophy Veteran Treasure Hunter. In the middle of our search for treasure, we speak to one of Saronia's mages. They give us some interesting lore about the man responsible for all of this, Zand. Apparently he, along with 2 others named Doga and Une, were the students of a legendary mage named Noah. Further context can apparently be found on the continent of Dalg to the south, so that becomes our next objective. The only wrinkle with this plan is that the Dalg mountain range has winds so strong that it's inaccessible. Conveniently for us though, Saronia's airship engineers give us an airship called the Nautilus, as thanks for saving their kingdom. It's powerful enough to get us through the winds. Receiving the Nautilus earns us the trophy, A Peaceful Saronia. And so we make our way through the mountains to Doga's manor, where we meet the man himself. He confirms for us that the imbalance between light and dark was caused by Zand. In the past, Noah gifted aspects of his power to his 3 students. Doga was given his magic, Une was given dominion over dreams, and Zand was given mortality. Somewhat understandably, he took this the wrong way, and so he used the power of the Earth Crystal to cause the earthquake that buried the other crystals. Causing the light to wane allowed the darkness to grow, and then Zand was able to channel its power for himself. We also get confirmation that Goldur's Earth Crystal was a fake, so that's cool. To aid us in our quest, Doga joins our party. We then head over to a hole inside his house, which leads us to the Cave of the Circle. While exploring it, we get the trophy Field Research Advanced for filling out 50% of the bestiary. And then at the end of the cave, Doga casts a spell to allow the Nautilus to dive underwater. He then explains that we're going to split up from here. He'll go to get a key to a place called Eureka, while we'll go to find and wake up his ally Une. Before heading towards that objective, I found an underwater area called the Saronia Catacombs, where I encountered an optional boss named Odin. He completely destroyed us, so let's put a pin in that and double back later when we're beefier. Heading south, we reach the Temple of Time where we find Noah's lute. We then head over to Une's shrine where we play it to wake her up. This gets us the trophy, Waking from Dreamland. She then joins our party and gives us the Fang of Fire. According to her, once we have all 4 fangs, we'll be able to break through the barriers put up by Zan to protect his house. Une then helps us unearth an ancient airship named the Invincible, at which point she tells us to find the Fang of Earth and then to meet her at Doga's Manor. The Invincible has a lot of uses, but the most important to mention is its ability to hop over small mountain ranges. This gives us access to quite a few optional areas, so let's go over them real quick. The first that I went to was Bahamut's lair, where we're able to have a rematch with Bahamut. It ends up being a bit of a close call, but I was able to pull through, and as a reward, Bahamut lets us summon them with the Evoker job. After this, we hop over to Lake Dor, where we're able to fight the much easier Leviathan. Defeating them also lets us summon them in battle. Before we leave the lake, I managed to grab the trophy Moneybags for earning 500,000 gil. With these 2 optional areas out of the way, I then use the Invincible to head over to the next main story destination, the Cave of Shadows. While I made my way down, I got the trophy Management Laborer for getting a job to level 99. And then at the bottom of the cave, I encounter the Guardian of the Fang of Earth, Hecaton Chair. We take him out easily and nab the Fang. Before heading towards the endgame, I remembered Odin, so I went back for round 2. The second fight went a lot easier than the first, and so we're rewarded with the summoning spell Catastro. Testing it out a little later got me the trophy Summon Master for learning all of the game's summoning spells. Getting back to the main track, we use the 4 fangs to break Zan's barriers and make our way into the Maze of the Ancients, where we find the Earth Crystal guarded by an entity named Titan. Beating him allows us to smooch the Earth Crystal, which grants us its blessing, earning us the trophy, Hope of the Earth. This gives us access to 3 new jobs. Magus, which is basically a stronger Black Mage, Summoner, which is basically a stronger Evoker, and Devout, which is basically a White Mage that became a cat girl. Shortly after this, I remembered, oh right, Doga and Une, so I left the maze and flew over to Doga's Manor to figure out what they wanted. The answer is apparently death, since they tell us that we need to charge up the key to Eureka, which is the place where the ancients sealed away all of the weapons that they considered to be too powerful for humanity to wield responsibly. The only way to generate the power for the key is to fight them. Luckily, while we kill their bodies, they'll apparently live on as spirits. With our 2 strongest allies dead, we head over to the Crystal Tower and then head inside to find a mirror on the first floor that teleports us into Eureka. Throughout this dungeon, we fight 5 bosses to acquire the legendary weapons. First, we fight Amon, which gets us a throwing weapon called the Moonring Blade. After that, we fight a Kunoichi, who is guarding a katana called the Masamune. Next, we find the Excalibur, guarded by a general. We then get a sword called Ragnarok for defeating an enemy named the Guardian. At this point, I left to heal my MP reserves, unaware that there was a healing spot in the following room. I only bring this up because on the way back, I got the trophy Seasoned Hero for getting my whole party to level 50. Finally, we fight a creature called Skyla, which gets us the Elder Staff. Acquiring it gets us the 2 final jobs. Ninja, which can use any weapon, and the Sage, which can use any and all spells. Acquiring the staff also gives us 2 trophies. The first is Item Detector, which we get for finding every hidden item in the game. The second is Forbidden Weapons, for finding all of the weapons in Eureka. With all of this new equipment, we climb up the many floors of the Crystal Tower until we confront Zand. Before his death, he gloats that we're too late to stop the darkness that is gathered from overtaking the world. We are then attacked by the entity that incarnated in response to the balance between light and dark being broken. The final boss of Final Fantasy III, the Cloud of Darkness. It uses its particle beam to instantly kill us. Luckily, the spirits of Doga and Une return to revive us so that we can head into the world of darkness to figure out how to save both worlds from being obliterated. We then receive 2 trophies. The first is Adventurous Wayfarer for visiting every location in the game. The second trophy is Enter the Darkness, which we earn for defeating Zand and entering the world of darkness. As a final dungeon, the World of Darkness is actually quite simple. There are 5 paths that branch off of the entrance. To the north, we find the Cloud of Darkness, who is currently unkillable. From the 4 ordinal directions, we can find the elemental crystals of the World of Darkness, which we need to take control of so that they and their associated Warriors of Darkness can help us to weaken the Cloud of Darkness enough to be killable. The first of the 4 that I went to was the Dark Earth Crystal to the southeast, which is guarded by a creature named Ahriman. The fight ended up being one of the most difficult in the game for me, but I managed to pull through. Now's a good time to bring up the main complication of the World of Darkness, which is that you can't leave once you've entered. Luckily, you can heal at the Dark Crystals, which means that so long as you can beat any of the 4 bosses, you'll probably be fine. The next crystal I went after was the Dark Fire Crystal to the northeast, which is guarded by the 2-headed dragon. For me, this boss ended up being the hardest in the game. It didn't even have a unique gimmick. It just hits really hard, so I'd often get stuck reviving and re-reviving party members while trying to give them the defensive buffs needed to stop them from immediately getting killed the next time they got hit. After that harrowing experience, I went up to the northwest to fight the Cerberus so that we could get the Dark Wind Crystal. Compared to the first 2, they were remarkably easy. Lastly, I went to the Dark Water Crystal to the southwest and fought a creature named Echidna. They required much more active healing than the Cerberus, while not being nearly tough enough to put them on the level of the first 2 bosses. And now, with the aid of the 4 Warriors of Darkness, we're able to stand a chance against the Cloud of Darkness. As a boss, it's surprisingly simple. The vast majority of the time, it'll use its particle beam, which deals enough damage that getting hit by it 3 times consecutively without healing would result in the whole party dying. When you combine this with its massive pool of HP, the fight turns into a surprisingly engaging war of attrition. I'd argue that narratively, the simplicity of the fight helps to characterize the Cloud of Darkness. The way it fights us isn't even remotely strategic. It has no plan for what it's doing, it's just trying to destroy everything in front of it. In a sense, you could say that it's not even really fighting us. Like, you wouldn't describe the damage caused by a hurricane as an attack. It's a force of nature. The way we talk about it is completely different how we talk about the actions of, say, people or even animals. A force of nature just doesn't possess the same kind of intent. In essence, the Cloud of Darkness is just the natural world's response to Xan throwing its balance out of whack. In this essay, I'll be proving that Final Fantasy III is actually a metaphor for man-made climate change. We successfully defeat the Cloud of Darkness, restoring the balance between the 2 worlds. This earns us the trophy, A Vision of Hope. From here, we just have 2 trophies left to get before the Platinum. The first is Legendary Treasure Hunter, which we're able to easily complete by finding the last 8 chests behind a secret wall in the Saronia Catacombs. The second is the trophy Field Research Professional, which requires us to find all 225 enemies in the game. In total, there were 13 enemies that I missed over the course of the game, so let's quickly knock them out. The first 3 were found in the tower on the left-hand side of the Sasune Castle, all the way from the start of the game. They were the Zombie, the Dark Eye, and the Red Wisp. After this, we shrink down to go back inside the Nepto Temple, where we find our 4th missed enemy, the Poison Bat. Next, we head up to the northwestern area of the Floating Continent, where we can find an enemy called the Slime. We then have to dive back into the subterranean lake beneath the Dwarf Island. 3 floors down, we're able to find our 6th enemy, the Merman. After this, we go back into the Temple of Time, where we miss 2 enemies, the Behemoth and the Pterodactyl. We then fly over to Bahamut's lair, where we find the Saber-toothed Liger and then the Lamia Queen. The next enemy was a bit of an interesting one. So remember Castle Hein? That dungeon is only accessible during that chunk of the game, so all of its enemies are missable. Lucky for us, the bestiary in the Pixel remasters isn't tied directly to your individual save files. This means I was able to reload to grab the enemy I missed, and so I go back to grab the Dullahan. Jumping back to the main save, we climb up to the 5th floor of the Crystal Tower. Here, there is a rare encounter with an enemy named the Yellow Dragon, who becomes our second to last bestiary entry. Finally, I went up to the top of the tower and re-killed Xan so that I could start the final dungeon again. This is because the last enemy I missed was in the corridor between the starting area of the World of Darkness and the room where we fight the Cloud of Darkness. In this area, we find the last enemy we need to fill out the bestiary, the Twin Dragon. This earns us the trophy, Field Research Professional. And with that, we get the Platinum Trophy for Final Fantasy III, Master of 3. In total, this Platinum took me 21 hours to achieve. Of the 3 Final Fantasies that I've gotten the Platinums for so far, this one was easily the most enjoyable. The game was very consistent about providing a fair challenge, with a lot of bosses requiring the kind of strategic thinking that makes me love turn-based RPGs. On top of that, the entire process of getting the Platinum never really felt dull or tedious to me. Even something as simple as combing a town to try and find a hidden item felt engaging, since it forced me to explore while considering where the developers would think to hide them. Now, with the Platinum wrapped up, let's talk about the extra things I did while going for 100% completion beyond the purview of the trophies. There are 3 main things that I went for: getting the whole party to level 99, acquiring 4 full sets of the most powerful gear in the game, and getting every job to level 99 for all 4 party members. Before I get into the grind, let me first explain the most powerful gear. In the Crystal Tower, there are 3 rare enemies who each have a low drop rate for what I'll be calling the Onion Gear, which can only be equipped by the Onion Knight job. These 3 enemies are the Yellow Dragon and its cousins, the Green and Red Dragons. They can be found on the 5th, 6th, and 7th floors respectively. All 3 of them can drop the Onion Sword and the Onion Shield, but the rest of it is exclusive. The Yellow Dragon has the helm, the Green Dragon the gauntlets, and the Red Dragon has the armor. Ultimately, I tried to multitask getting the Onion Gear with getting to max level. Within the first 21 hours after getting the Platinum, I went from level 55 to 99 with the whole party. In that time, I managed to get most of the Onion Gear that I needed, except for 2 sets of gauntlets. From here I got pretty unlucky and it ended up taking another 3 hours before I finally had 4 full sets. Finally, I just had the jobs to level. In total, there are 22 jobs in the game, and the way they level is a bit odd. Basically, you accrue job points by performing actions in battle. Unfortunately, the game doesn't tell you how many you need before leveling up, so you kinda just gotta wing it. The best strategy I found for leveling them quickly is to have one party member attack while the rest of them defend. In an encounter with 4 enemies, this means every party member is guaranteed 4 actions worth of points. The benefit of doing it this way is that there's no animation for defending, so having most of the party do it saves a lot of time. Since you're going to need hundreds, if not thousands of battles to max out all the jobs, any small time saves really add up. The time I spent grinding for job level after getting all the Onion Gear took 18.5 hours, bringing my total time for 100% completion to 63.5 hours. To be honest, the grind wasn't really that bad. It was pretty easy to just mindlessly blast through battle after battle. At the end of the day though, I can't recommend doing it because the game gives you no reason to. Nothing in the game acknowledges you reaching max level or getting the Onion Gear, and there really isn't anyone to use it against since you beat all the hardest enemies long before doing any of the grind. Perhaps if the game had an extremely powerful optional super boss, then that could incentivize getting the Onion Gear, at least for the party's main damage dealers. Lacking that kind of post-game challenge though, the grind ultimately serves no purpose. To close out the video, I'd like to talk about a little extra thing that I did that I don't consider to be part of 100% completion, but it's still pretty interesting. Okay, so remember the Nepto Dragon from way earlier? It's meant to be an unkillable enemy who you never go back to at any point in the game, so I decided to try and kill it. This actually ended up being surprisingly manageable since it doesn't do a crazy amount of damage. The real challenge is surviving long enough to chip away at its 60,000 HP. My strategy hinged on using 3 monks and a white mage. The idea was to take advantage of a quirk with monks where the amount of damage they do unarmed scales off of their job level. This allowed me to do around 1,000 damage per attack once their jobs were at level 99. From there, all that was left was to get my party's HP high enough so that they could survive a hit from the Nepto Dragon. Ultimately, I had to get my party up to level 27 before I had enough wiggle room. From there, the white mage was able to keep everyone mostly alive. Doing this allowed me to defeat the Nepto Dragon. Overall, it only took like 5 hours of grinding.